Welcome back everyone to the Not Your Mama's History YouTube channel. Today, I am going to be answering your questions. Now for today, I asked for you all to submit questions. I know it was so long ago. I'm sorry, I moved, as you all can tell. So I have a space where I could be a lot more creative. It's a little bit more room. And so I'm really happy where we moved. And I've been decorating and making the place nice so that you all can step in to my apartment with me. So I wanted to make it nice for you all before uploading more videos. So for today, I'm going to answer all those questions that you all submitted months ago, but not every one of them. This is probably going to be a multi-series, so this will be part one for this Q&A. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start tackling them one by one. Oh, I forgot. I actually have with me some Uncle Nearest whiskey. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of bourbon, whiskey in general. Bourbon is my favorite, but I am a huge fan of Uncle Nearest. Uncle Nearest, call me because I am out here on these streets really advocating for y'all. So if you all don't know the Uncle Nearest story, you need to go to their website. I will link it down below. No, this is not a sponsored video. Hopefully next time it will be. Again, call me. So I'm going to have my teacup here. I'm gonna add some Uncle Nearest to my teacup. Not too much, just a little something to spice up this Q&A. All right, so we're gonna get started with, I can't really pronounce her name, Mirchumina. I'm not sure, I'll put it up for you. What do you wish more people knew about historical interpretation and interpreters? I think what I wish people knew most is that we are professionals, and a lot of interpreters now are certified by the National Association of Interpretation, which I would encourage everyone going into the interpretation field, a historical interpretation field, to actually go get their certification. It's the best thing I've ever done. It made me a better interpreter, and it took my game from here up here. So definitely, and I would say that we are in many ways people's therapist, because we get a lot of the brunt from the miseducation, the pushback from the miseducation people have received from school and families. So thank you for that question. Next, Diana Maria. Are there characteristics or little special details in particular about garments from prior eras that you wish were incorporated into clothing that is available today? Yes. First and foremost, because there wasn't really a thing known as central air and heating, your clothing really was designed to move through spaces and regulate your temperature for you. And I think that we've lost a lot of that, which is very frustrating, because sometimes I don't really want to rely on central air heating, although I'm so grateful, so very grateful that in the winter I can press a button, or I have a boiler and my house is nice and toasty in the winter. But I wish that we had a better system of clothing, for example, undergarments, that helps us to regulate our temperature. I like that a lot better. Also, I like the structure in older styles. I think it just adds a better quality to the clothing. And I wish that we had that today. Next question, Tales from the Attic. How did you get into living history? It's something I love to go into, but I'm not sure how. I'm not so interested in reenactments, much more in education, engaging the public. Are there ways to get into the field that don't go through reenactment? Absolutely. If I could do it again, I may have skipped a lot of the reenacting as a hobby. I'm sorry if you all hear sirens. I live in New York City, so we have a lot of noise pollution. But I would say there's absolutely a way that you can get into living history, the history field, rather than reenacting on the hobby side. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference between a hobbyist and a professional. The biggest difference is that a hobbyist can do what they like, whereas a professional, they're held to certain standards, and they're expected to interact with the public, and the public has to leave knowing more than this is my gun and this part shoots and this is the bottom part, or these are buttons and they're this wide. And so I think there are many reenactors out there who are very professional, but there are also many reenactors out there who just do it because that's what they love, and that's fine. But when you're talking to public, there's a certain level of professionalism and understanding of history that's very important for people to walk away with. So first things first, I would encourage you to find a museum that hires people for historical interpretation. But first you want to volunteer at living history sites or historical sites to get your interpretation experience, because your interpretive experience, because that's the first thing when I'm hiring someone. I want to know what type of interpretive experience they have. And I sometimes hire people who don't have a lot of interpretive experience, but it's a big plus if someone has interacted with the public on a historical site before. So volunteering is always a huge plus. And be ready and just practice as much as you can. That's part of the finding groups of historical interpreters who are professionals, because we push each other to do better. Thank you for your question. Next, History Chic 1776. Would you consider making videos for school use to teach about the lives of enslaved people? Almost every video I've ever previewed really focuses on the institution itself, with little about the lives of people forced to live in it. It's really interesting you ask. I'm sure that you could use the upcoming series I'm doing, these routes. And the first one is a day in the life of a lady's maid, and we're focusing in on her life and what her life would have been like. So absolutely, I think it would, you could use that for that purpose. But I made them specifically to a general education and an introduction for people into the world of the enslaved. Hannigan Law. When you meet with children, what are they most curious about? Do you see their curiosity spark learning history in a different way? Thank you. I think they're most curious about who I am, and do I really live here? Are these my everyday clothes? That they're really interested in what they see before them. But something very amazing is that once they get over that, they're good. Whereas I find adults more so get caught up in the world that they've stepped into. Children are like, okay, cool. You're a historical interpreter. Your name's Cheney. Okay, so about the slavery thing. And I think I like the fact that children approach things so open, and because they haven't been as polluted as the rest of us about history and the world, they're a lot more open to viewing the world in a different way. So yes, they're most curious about just how is this still going on. I think that's the second thing I get asked. This is over, right? That's basically the next question. And then they're always very confused about, this was actually legal? And so when I say yes, it is like mind-blowing for them. Next, Gloria Swan Song. How do you handle finding footwear for interpreting? Do you ever compromise accuracy for comfort or availability? Absolutely. Although, a caveat, generally speaking, no, I do not sacrifice accuracy for comfortability. But recently I have started wearing Sabas, which are shoes from very similar from North Africa and the Middle East that inspired the 18th century shoes, that the mules that were worn. And so I thought that it would make sense to actually give the money to the people who originally inspired that footwear, rather than giving it to people here. Although, let me make a caveat, I do support historical footwear by makers here in the US. Hands down, I absolutely do. But if I can find a company that is from the culture from which certain shoes were appropriated from, I prefer to give them my money rather than someone here. But I also still purchase US made shoes. I love shoes, especially historical shoes. So I buy from a number of reproducers. I absolutely love historical footwear, but over the past year, so I'm 31 now, I've started to notice a difference in the end of the workday from when I was 24. To me, it feels a big difference. So Sabas are for 18th century. It has changed my hearth cooking life. I feel like so at home now because I'm very comfortable in my 18th century stays, and I'm wearing like practical house shoes. You cannot tell me that these hearths are not my actual home. Next, Cat Me Guy. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but I tried. Do you have a favorite ensemble that you like to wear? What period would you like to focus more on in a professional capacity? Ooh, I would say, honestly, so I love the structure of mid to late 19th century clothing. Visually, I absolutely love it, as you can tell. Absolutely love it. But the corsetry, I hate. And I have excellent corsetry. Shout out to Red Threaded. It is custom to my body. It fits very comfortable. It is very comfortable to wear. But in comparison to nothing, it is not comfortable. I cannot tell you, I have so many of my historical friends that will lie up and down and say, oh no, it feels so great. It feels better than me wearing nothing. Nobody thinks that. I don't know anyone who honestly, if they could choose bare-chested over a corset, I don't think anyone would be like, a corset hands down. Although, as I just said, my 18th century stays by Red Threaded are more comfortable than my bra. I will repeat that. My 18th century stays by Red Threaded are more comfortable than any bra I've ever worn, any modern bra I've ever worn in all my life. And I feel so comfortable in my 18th century stays. Like, whew. So I do like 18th century clothing, but nothing compares to the beautiful work done on 19th century clothing. From, I would say, the 1830s to about the 1890s, 80s, late 80s. Just the structure and the detail and the pleats, and I love it. And then in a professional capacity, what period would you like to focus on? That is separate from clothing, obviously. I love focusing on the enslaved persons in the North in the 18th century. That's just something I will continue to explore. And then, of course, Harlem, 1920s. I love it. And then in the inverse, I like to look at Georgia, 1920s. So it's like those two at two different places in the country, because I feel like Harlem Nights in the 20s were very hoity-toity. They were very proper. And at least from my research, I'm very fascinated with the New Negro movement, so the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. But I love that contrast of people like Bessie Smith, who was like, oh, y'all really tried it. It reminds me of, on the inverse of like Spelman women today. They're very, you could just tell a Spelman woman, a woman who graduated from Spelman University or Spelman College, you could just tell. They're very graceful, their backs are very straight, and they're Black excellence and beauty, and you could just tell looking at a Spelman graduate. So that's kind of looking at a Harlemite in the 1920s who was really involved in the New Negro scene versus someone like Bessie Smith or Ma Rainey. I love that contrast. So I've done gone off script over here. All right, the littlest thistle asked, I saw your fabulous birthday trip recently. Do you generally specialize in 19th century historical periods, or do you sometimes get to do more recent periods in history outside of fun birthday weekends? Or can that not be reenacted if people are still alive? That's a great question. So for my birthday, we assembled, a couple friends of mine, went to the TWA hotel, which used to be the TWA terminal. And so we wore 1960s clothing, and it was really fun, especially during a panorama. So we were safe, we had masks on. I'll insert picture here. But that wasn't really a reenacting trip. I generally do not reenact after the 1940s. I think 1947 is like usually my cutoff, unless I'm doing some type of activism. So I went to a march with Marvin Greer in 1960s clothing, and I reproduced a pennant, a 1960s pennant from the March on Washington. And that's something that I will do, but generally speaking, I don't know, for me, reenacting periods really where people are still here, for me, I don't really generally like to do, unless I'm actively working with those people to interpret that history. I don't know. I don't really have a definitive feeling one way or another. I just generally don't reenact periods that people are still alive today. So I think the latest that I've done are 1930s. And it being a real historical interpretation and not a protest piece. So yeah, I love vintage clothing, so I absolutely am passionate about plus size vintage clothing, and I have a lot of it. And shout out to Miss Diane Schiffer for really getting me into it and encouraging me to do so, even though I am a plus size woman and it is extremely hard to find plus size vintage. If you could go back in time to any point in the 1800s, what year would you pick and what would you do? Not 1 year before 1992. I would not want to live before 1992. I was born in the 80s, and even I would not go back to the 80s. So yeah, there's not 1 year that I can think of anytime before 1992. Next one. You've shown us your favorite books for kids that introduce or build on the experience of slavery. What adult books do you think do the best job of telling the stories of slaves and slavery? I have a few right here. We have The Half Has Never Been Told. This is by Edward Baptist. Really good. I would just go pick it up. Then of course, Generations of Captivity by Ira Berlin. Pick it up. I'm specific because I live in New York City. I do read a lot of Shane White. Rest in peace. Oh, and I'm going to point out Emmanuel Dabney's list, his reading list. Emmanuel Dabney, amazing historian. He works for the National Park Service. I'm going to link his list down below. Check it out. There's nothing more I can say that he has not already put up on his list. Next, how do I find courage to advocate for myself in costuming as well as in life? This is very difficult. This is from Fee Tan. And I'm not sure if you are a person of color, but if you are a person of color, I find it is extremely difficult to advocate for yourself in wherever sphere you find yourself in. And a lot of my strength and courage to do so comes from my ancestors. I would encourage you to find your why. Why are you doing this? And I think people who do historical interpretation should have a broader why than just wearing pretty clothing. If you just like wearing pretty clothing, you can do that as a hobby. But if you are doing that as a professional, whether a seamstress or a historical interpreter, you should have a larger why. You want to tell people stories through clothing, or you want to, like myself, honor my ancestors through the clothing that I wear, and visually, as well as through going through historical interpretation in those clothes. It really strengthens me to know that I am an advocate for my ancestors as well as my people today. And it just fills me with so much more strength if it was just me, Cheney, doing this. If it was just me, honestly, I don't think I would ever speak up. But because it isn't just about me. I have no choice. I have to do this work. I have to speak up. And in life, I have friends and family. I have an amazing community around me, people, my parents, my business partners, Jerome and Carolyn Outlaw. They are just, everyone's just so supportive, and they advocate for me when sometimes I don't personally advocate for myself within my personal life. And so having a community, a family, a tribe around you who supports you in that way, it's amazing. Second to the last question, I hate usernames. I hate usernames too. Love your username. Where do you get your fabric? Also, what materials do you normally use? Great question. I usually silo my historical clothing into two categories: historically accurate and my art. For example, what I'm wearing today. And I usually, with my art pieces, I usually design them to have 100% accurate construction, or at least close to accurate construction, but having a modern fabric choice. So specifically West African fabrics, or fabrics that connect me to my African American roots. So jean fabric that is reminiscent of hip hop, Atlanta, 1990s, early 2000s. So those are some on the art side. What I'm wearing today is a West African wax print. It was made in the Netherlands to be sold specifically to a West African market. So this one, and I usually source most of my materials, my art materials, from West African sellers or black sellers in Harlem, New York. And then on the other side, I purchase a lot of my fabrics from Burnley and Trowbridge. They always got my back. And then also I live in New York City, so I could go down to the garment district. It is really expensive, but you can find whatever fabric you ever wanted in your life. That red fabric on that dress that Jana made me, that 18th century gown, that red wool was from Mood Fabrics. We picked it out together at Mood. Never mind. That fabric. Next one from Oben Karp. What is the best way to support your efforts? First and foremost, by leaving me a positive message with just supporting me. That has gotten me through some really hard times. I collect those. I keep those in a folder. And it's really gotten me through some really tough times. So thank you all so much, and please keep them coming. It matters to me. It really does matter to me, and it really helps me. And then of course, financially supporting me through my Patreon. There are quite a few perks to being a part of the Patreon community. First and foremost, at the $5 and up level, you get to view my These Roots series 2 weeks before it hits YouTube. And I will also be releasing some behind the scenes footage directly to Patreons that no other platforms will get. So that really supports most of what I do. These Roots, everyone behind the camera, they are paid, and they are all Black. So from the director of photography to the director to the producers, everyone, it is Black. So I think that's one of the first times that's done in a video such as this. So by supporting through Patreon, you support my entire crew. And I want to do more of these. It took 2 months. At this point, it takes 2 months of Patreon subscribers for me to support one show. So the more Patreons I get, the more these roots of the series I can do. So please make sure you go and support us through my Patreon, which will be down below. Thank you so much for all you do. Please remember to like us and subscribe. Thank you for joining us. Uncle Nearest, call me. Call me, Uncle Nearest. Call